particularly, I think, and I think it's an important message because particularly where you guys are just about to finish or just starting your master's program. I mean, I think going into a professional career or whatever comes next with the expectation that the ideal is this sort of multi-sector, cross-cutting, de-siloed approach, that you'll have a position where you actually will be responsible for everything, for a life cycle of anything or something that actually contains the externalities or has control over the entire process. My personal experience is that that's not the case. The current reality is that what you'll ultimately do is going to be fairly siloed. It might be an advocacy position, it might be in government, it might be related to a certain theme or a certain process or a certain company or what have you. Or even within the government. I mean, I think, I am in an environment bureau. I'm siloed in that environment bureau, just as I have colleagues who are in the energy bureau who are siloed in the energy bureau. My message, and why I'm somewhat defending silos in a sort of facetious way, is that it may be that is the reality that you're in, but it doesn't mean that you have to ignore all of those other things to be effective in your job. My view, and it might be an idealized one, is if my colleague in the Energy Bureau wants to be successful in achieving energy security in Southeast Asia for a country that is currently energy impoverished or doesn't have access to renewable or clean energy, if that goal is going to be achieved, then my hope is that that colleague will recognize that energy question is also an environment one, and will reach out to hopefully a similarly siloed but somewhat with different capacities. And I would hope that actually also applies in the private sector and NGOs, et cetera. But I think that specialization shouldn't be knocked just because it's specialization or it's targeted. I think you should be able to look out and actually see that it's a much bigger problem. So I think that might get us started.
Hey, I'm Christine Smith. I'm a second-year GEP student, and I have a question that's, I guess, more directed at the two colleagues on the panel that are in the government. I can't remember which, I think it was Lark you talked about, or maybe it was Julian, about incremental change, and I was wondering how, in a slower-moving bureaucracy that you guys are working in, how you maintain, your vision of the long goal, and how do you deal on a day-to-day basis with the slower-moving nature, and how do you get good work done and manage a long-term vision of creating that incremental change, I guess, if you have strategies or anything that helps you manage that and managing change from the inside?
Sure. Yeah, I think I talked somewhat about incremental change. I think I personally come at it from a very just pragmatic view. I don't get frustrated with the bureaucracy, and I think because within myself, how I feel about an issue is separate from my professional opinion on an issue. And sometimes they're in contrast. So I work on hydraulic fracturing at the EPA. I'm helping write the assessment report. If you don't know about it, you can look at it. It's EPA HS study, that's the thing. And I also help coordinate, and I'm the staff lead on a multi-agency research collaboration on unconventional oil and gas. And so we work with DOE and DOI on trying to figure out how we can collaborate with the dollars we get, because if you've ever looked at a federal budget, everybody's taking a hit right now. And I personally think it's on purpose. So, it is really frustrating. There are tangible effects of not getting a lot of money. There's tangible effects of working with colleagues who are not excited about what we're doing. And so I think for me, the incremental change is trying to find those folks who are excited about the same vision and figuring out a way to work with them. And so I got really lucky in my career path of getting to work with people who are really motivated and excited. And, I get to work with the guy who is the former Deputy Assistant Administrator for Science in the Office of Research and Development. And he has this vision that agencies can work together. And, that's where that multi-agency project comes from. And so I think when you get to see things like that, we just had a 5-agency conference talking about research. It was feds only, but it was the first time, I think, that ever these 5 agencies were in the room talking about health aspects, talking about resources, talking about induced seismicity, and trying to figure out, we're all doing some parts of this research, so how do we leverage the dollars we get to do this better? Or how do we piggyback on things when we have mandates or resource limitations? And so when I get to be a part of things like that, that's really exciting to me. And I think some people might feel like, well, it's really slow, you can't really do anything. I mean, the first step is talking, and so I think it really just depends on the person. Like, I think if somebody is okay with that slow-moving type of change, then they're probably going to be able to kind of see the long view. I'm also an Uber planner. Like, my retirement is very secure. So, like, that's just the kind of person I am. And you got to know that about yourself. Like, I don't know that I would do as well at an NGO where they wanted you to change pace all the time, or you had to respond to all of these different things because of the person I am. And I don't really know Twitter very well. So, that helps. Or not. Or a car company.
So I'm going to toss a question out that piggybacks on that. So I wonder how much of your time is spent defending things as opposed to breaking new ground. I mean, one of the things, as someone who's a little older than anyone else on the panel, one of the things I hear a lot from my friends of a certain age in the big Washington NGOs is that they spend an awful lot of time just defending past gains, right? And that's noble work, because I don't want to see the Clean Water Act gutted, and I don't want to see the Endangered Species Act, what are we on, the 47th attempt to repeal it, and so on and so forth. And yet it's frustrating at the same time, because you get a sense that there's a lot of status quo organizations that are sort of protecting something that they think is worth hanging on to, and it ties up a lot of their time and resources because it's not enough what we have. So I wonder how much of your time do you feel is actually spent? I mean, Lark, you mentioned about budgets being cut and so on and so forth. I'm curious if you feel like a big part of what you do and take pride in doing is protecting past gains, or are you mostly trying to move the needle forward?
So I'm really lucky. I get to work in the Office of Research and Development, and while we don't make policy, we get to do the cool stuff like science, which is, I love science. Like, I could talk science all day. I want to just soak it all up. So I don't get paid enough to defend policy. Gina McCarthy does, and that's her job, and other folks that are senior leaders in the agency, like that's their job. And so what they do by going and speaking on behalf of the gains that EPA's made, or gains of the environmental movement, is it frees up staff to do the things that they're excited about, which are doing research on novel sensors. I think the paper is public. There's this guy, if you're interested, this guy came up, his name's Evan Tona. He came up with a passive sensor that you could just stick in the ground near a plant or a well pad, and it can tell you what kind of pollutants are coming out. That's awesome, right? So now here you have this thing you can just stick in the ground, and then you don't have to be guessing, is it going there, is it not going there? It just collects what's going there. And so that's my answer to your question, is for the folks who are interested in doing that kind of higher level work of defending policy, I think it's there, I think it's needed, I think it's really important. But I think folks who are not interested in that, there's a niche for you too. And that's really one of the exciting things about being in the government. If you loved buying things, well, guess what? We have procurement at the EPA, and we need you to get us a deal so we have more money to do the work of the environment. Those are the things you don't always realize. So there's a lot of people who do contracts, who do business, who work on our facilities, who make sure we have clean air inside the building too. And so those niches exist for all types of jobs. Please.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actively defending policy as much as operating within an environment that is full of sort of these legacy structures and decisions and policies and everything else. And so I think when you're looking at a specific issue and the change you want to create in that issue, be it transboundary water cooperation or access to water or what have you, or other environmental issues, I think when you look out across the landscape, you're actually considering policy gains that have been made and policy sort of decisions that have been made years ago that somehow through whatever sort of powers that have been imparted on them are continuing to have that momentum, continuing to have that traction. And that is limiting, I think, in the amount of change that you can actually impart. in the work that we do, I think I personally am always looking for ways to be disruptive, of course in a cleared interagency policy sort of way. But I think that's sort of more so it's not, like I said, it's not an actively defending sort of here's my territory, here's what we're proud of having built, and everybody stay away, but more so here's what we'd like to do, what's in our way, and how do we actually overcome those challenges.
Other questions, comments?
I was going to say real quick, virtually almost all my time at Climate Action is spent playing defense and trying to hang on to some of the wins we've made in the environmental movement. And I think that's a strategy of the opposition, is to make us keep trying to defend laws that were passed 30 or 40 years ago. And it's working, and they're also cutting the budgets of some important agencies at the same time. So know what NGO you want to work for, if you want to play defense and try and chip away at the industry, or do you want to work at an NGO that advocates for solar power and expanding that? You can work on the solutions project, I think.
My name is David Shoulders. Sorry. I'm a master's student in anthropology, actually. Speaking of those laws, 40 years ago, I worked this past summer with the Office of Surface Mining, so the 1977 Reclamation Act. But I specifically worked with a branch that worked with community development and environmental stewardship, placing AmeriCorps members in historical mining communities. And one of the things that I ended up witnessing, looking to do a project in the Upper Peninsula with new mining interests, but my director told me that I can't look too much into the new mining because those were associations with activist organizations. And so all that we could do was reactionary work. So after this community has been impacted by the mining, by the environmental degradation, then we can come in and make the change. And that was kind of a frustrating point, especially looking in the Upper Peninsula where there's these major mining companies coming in. And I'm just curious, from the EPA and the State Department or government standpoint, where you see the role of environmental policy in preventative versus reactionary. Because I would love to see more of a preventative position, but I realize the role of the government oftentimes is simply management and reaction. Love to hear what you guys would say.
No, I would too, but I mean, I think, and actually I don't think it's just government. I mean, I think if anyone on this panel actually has a lot of experience in trying to get people to focus on what is going to happen rather than what has happened, I think it's probably Sajid, and trying to get governments and investors and communities to think of the risks that are possible in the future, or the considerations that need to be made now for things that are going to affect maybe not even them but future generations. I mean, I think that's the constant challenge, and unfortunately, not just government but large organizations, communities, political systems, you're usually responding to a crisis, you're usually responding to something that's happening right now rather than thinking about something that's happening long term. I mean, my sense was that, maybe I'll stop there, and I don't know if you want to.
Speaking on that, I think the reason why we're able to play that role more so is because we operate in a very different political environment in the countries that we work in. A lot of these places, they're already feeling the brunt and really feeling the impact of climate change. They're feeling the impact of these disasters, much more than places in the United States are. I mean, in the U.S., you look at some of the worst disasters in the last 20 years. You're talking about impact in maybe 0.3% of the GDP. It's not really felt throughout. So that doesn't really push the dialogue in any direction. It doesn't have that same impact where you would in a country that 20% of their economic activity is halted for years because of a day's worth of storms. So I think it is that level of awareness and impact really changes the dialogue within a country. So the countries that we are able to work with, they're coming from a very different place, and that allows us. That's really the catalyst for us to be able to focus on those long-term initiatives and those long-term gains that need to come about, rather than having to defend or fight for something. We have the requests coming to us saying, we're already feeling this impact. We need whatever help that can be provided in addressing that and preventing it for the future. And it's a very different dialogue that's happening in those countries compared to what's happening here, and that's really what allows us to have that focus more so than domestically.
I think I'd like to second what Sajid is saying. Awareness is really important, and I think, when you have folks coming in, and I'm not speaking for the EPA, but when you folks coming in that are going to do mining or going to do logging, they hear a lot about the benefits of what's going to happen. They don't always hear about the drawbacks or the potential hazards, and I think, finding ways to build awareness through either the news media or different outlets that may reach these folks is fairly important. And so, that's something I actually learned in the program is coming from an engineering perspective, we didn't really think about media, but media is such a huge part of daily life. And, just because you can't reach someone this way, maybe you can go around a different way and reach them. And so I think that's important is, if you notice something and it's, within your toolbox to crawl on different things, that's like different media outlets, maybe that's possible. As a federal employee, obviously we can't do that. But then there are whistleblower protections, so it's up to an individual to think about that.
So do we have time for more? So I'm Paul Wapner. I teach in the program, and this is a great panel, and I have to say this panel and the one before just reconfirms my feeling that I'd put our graduates up against any others. And you guys are great. Mike, I'm going to ask a question that I'm not sure I want to know the answer to, but I want to ask it. In your experience in the program, you had to take some courses which were fairly theoretical, or you had to sort of at least do some abstract thinking. And I'm wondering, in hindsight, does that experience translate at all into what you're doing now? And can you point out, was it a liability? Was it a benefit? How do we think about the relationship between theory and practice? We have the luxury of being in a university where we can sort of ask questions we have no idea the answers to, and actually it's great to assign them to students. But I just wondered if you had some thoughts on that.
So I'm going to answer this because I felt actually very privileged to be here as a grad student. Like I said, I came into this, I was a scientist, I work in engineering. I actually worked as an environmental engineering consultant and watching things I hated. And I came here and it was like, whoa, this was so much bigger than I ever thought. It wasn't just like, okay, refinery, oily water into ocean, I'm upset about that. It was like, this is a fundamental part of our structure of life. And so having that in the back of my mind still keeps me asking big questions all the time when I'm in meetings and when I'm, talking to folks. It's kind of what still keeps me jazzed, I guess, but getting back to how do you make it through the mind-numbing strategy of bureaucracy? Well, I'm still jazzed about the big questions. Can we reinvent our energy structure? I don't know. I hope so, right? Can we diverge from fossil fuels and figure something out? And so I think that still makes me excited. And I don't know if I would have approached it from what is the real cause versus what is a symptom if I hadn't been through the program.
I think GEP definitely helped me articulate a lot of things that I was feeling in my heart about environmentalism in the future that I wouldn't have been able to do if I didn't take this program. Just to emphasize what I said about redefining what is success in your career, that whole notion was foreign to me before this program, but now it's a way of life. And it's definitely why I chose to work where I'm working and the reason to wake up in the morning every day almost. And also acknowledging, like you said about privilege, acknowledging the privilege of my background and even being able to come into a program like this is a privilege. And I also thought about the quote where it says, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so trying to live up to a quote like that, I think, is very GEP-ish.
Building on what John said, these theoretical underpinnings of everything that we learned in your class and Judy's class, it really, that's the driving factor for me in terms of, how can I, address these questions and issues in what I'm doing now. To give a practical example, I talk about, one thing I've been trying to push is, greening reconstruction and recovery, knowing the challenges that we face and a lot of these countries face. And people come back and say, oh, you're talking about climate change adaptation. Like, no, I'm not talking about climate change adaptation here. I'm talking about greening. And, these concepts, it doesn't always stick with the people there. And I'm constantly trying to figure out how we can frame and retool these ideas into, having it, be more accessible to that broader audience. And these theoretical underpinnings of what we learned here, how can I approach that through my line of work? That's, I think, constant in what I'm trying to do on a personal level through my career. So, absolutely.
I think just very, very quickly, I think your question, I think, speaks really to how I view my experience at AU and the GEP program, which is, I think, and this sort of relates a little bit to what Christine said about incremental change. The world out there, the system, whatever you want to call it, it's not geared to make our work or our goals easily achievable. There isn't a perfect slot for an environmental policy person from GEP to go in and deploy their ideas and realize their objectives. That's very rare to find if you've got it. But what the program has, I think the breadth of the program, the perspective, the professors, et cetera, what that gave me, and I assume what it gave others on this panel in this room, is I think the sensibility that allows you to tackle perhaps projects or jobs or interventions that aren't perhaps immediately, obviously, an environmental one, but it gives you the sensibility to be able to be resilient in the face of challenges or maybe diversions of where you're actually trying to go, and gives you the skills, the resilience, the interest, and the passion, and really the tools to be able to move it slightly in the way that you can towards meeting those goals and towards those objectives. So for me, environmental is in the title of my office, but I'm working on U.S. foreign policy, and I think day in and day out, it's not a purely environmental one in the sort of traditional environmental sense, but the program is able to give you the tools to be able to make that and realize those aims in that position. So just a quick thought.
So I think things have changed a bit since our cohort graduated in 2007. The program, as we mentioned earlier, has grown significantly. But I know something, and I'm not going to put these guys on the spot, but our cohort talked about in the program and after the program was some frustration sometimes with the leap between the theoretical and then practical skills that you could implement that would be desirable in terms of a checklist of things that an employer wants to see. And I imagine much of that has been addressed as the program has grown. I can recall some of the things that we talked about were like perhaps more robust, this is just one example, more robust GIS programming, because pretty much any job that you can bring a GIS skill set to, you're going to be a highly desired candidate. And it translates, I think, into all the different environmental arenas that we're interested in. But back to your original question, I think the underpinning that the program provided in terms of helping to set my worldview was instrumental. Also, in being able to set where I wanted to fit. I remember in Judy's class, the first class I took, I realized I wanted to be part of the change from the inside. It was more comfortable for me. And had I not taken that class, I wouldn't have been able to find where I fit into the larger discussion and movement. And so for that, I'm extremely grateful. I think, though, that there could be some additional kind of translational steps that could be made in terms of more hands-on types of skill sets.
I actually have a related question, and it is for any alumni who would want to answer. Now that you have the perspective of being out of the program and looking back, is there something, and Lark has already had this question from me before in a different setting, but is there something, whether it's a specific course like GIS and skills that would have been beneficial in looking for jobs, or something else that 2 years goes fast, and sometimes I think you're making decisions just because it's like, oh, that's in front of me, I got to decide right now. But in looking back, is there something that you would have done different, whether a course or something else, that now in your current profession you think would have been useful or better, allowed you to maximize the time while you were here?
There's a response in the back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, what Leah was said, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's hard to find a balance. You need to have the balance between the theoretical and the environmental component. And something which I found I would have really, would have been very useful for me is some organizational behavior, organizational management classes. I think all of us have worked with somebody or with a boss at some point where we've said they don't really know how to manage people or how to manage projects, but they have a great background in policy or in science. And so to be a better professional and to be a better environmental advocate working for change, learning how to do things like strategic planning, manage a budget, fundraising, managing human capital, conflict resolution, negotiations within your own organization, that helps you in your career. That also helps you to be more successful in implementing change and helping to advance environmental issues. And I don't know how things have changed since we came through. Those courses might be involved a little more, but I think that kind of hard skills combined with the environmental policy as well, so you can become the head of Clean Water Action and maybe be successful in implementing change or move up the chain in the EPA or whatever it is.
Thoughts on that? What you would have done differently? It's okay to say you totally maxed it out and did it perfectly and you wouldn't change anything. That's fine. I'd love to hear that. But
I mean, I probably wouldn't change anything. I think it's an advantage. Some of the things that GEP teaches you is an advantage over some of the other schools in town and some of the people working in the city that don't often have a theoretical approach to problems in the environment. And I think for me, that's been an advantage of where I work and some of the other things I do. And then when I find a person that has a theoretical approach to the environment, we usually get along. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I felt like I maxed it out. I got a boron. I got to work at Commerce on like how climate change intersects with the financial industry. So between those two things, it was pretty, like but I also made the most of it. Like I just took on as much as I could because I knew this was a special window. So I don't know that I would change anything. I guess I wanted more science, but I think I would have just had to take more courses. And that's also my background is being interested in that stuff.
Maybe I'll duck the question on the program specifically and just say, I mean, DC is an incredibly dorky town on policy issues, and I don't know if this is the same in other large cities, but the time that you have here, the conversation we're having today, the issues that we're wrestling with today are being discussed in a number of places around town on a daily basis by movers and shakers, decision makers of all stripes, and I think the time that you have here not to tap into that network, not to just go and crash a meeting, hopefully that's open to the public, and make those connections. I mean, that's for me. That's not to minimize the role of the program itself, but it's such a benefit, and I would urge you to really think about those opportunities.
I just wanted to throw something out for alumni while we're on this point. I really thank Paul for bringing it up. So I'm part of that growth. I've been here. I'm in my 5th year here now, and I'm really glad I'm here, and I'm staying, and it's been wonderful. And we've been pushing this conversation, I think, among the faculty. And I think on one level, there's a really strong consensus. I think we all agree that perspective and a strong conceptual framework is really important. It makes us distinct. We put a lot of effort into that. I don't know how you do really, truly strategic thinking about social change without having that. So we're not letting that go. skills are really important, and we've been trying to do what we can to bring practical skills in. Sometimes we don't always know, so I love that comment about the skill of being able to navigate through managing people and projects and so on. Inside the SIS building, when people talk about skills, they're talking about stats, they're talking about GIS. People have a narrow sense of what skills mean. This is something where our alumni can really help us and help us think that through. And I think perspective, skills, and experience are the three, and knowledge are the kind of poles of what we're doing. And we're not going to squeeze out any of those. But to help us sharpen exactly what those mean, and not only in D.C., because this is a very D.C.-centric conversation we're having at the moment, and we're very conscious that that's only one aspect of where our people go. Tell us what skills mean. Tell us what perspective means. Tell us what knowledge and experience mean in a more refined way. That helps us keep the program fresh and adapting and vital while hanging on to those core things. And this is one of the absolutely most valuable. The school will tell you, the dean will tell you, give us money, and I'm not going to say anything about that, but that's what we really need, is that input of information. And it's great to see under Simon's leadership, we're really starting to move toward engaging with our alumni in ways that, frankly, we haven't done as good a job in the past as we might. But we're big enough now, and we have the resources, and we're doing it. And so I hope people will really just tell us those things. We got till about 4:10, so we got time for a couple more questions or observations, if they. Marley?
Kind of technical, but for the alums who feel like they would still like to develop those skills, the alumni audit benefit that you have, $100 for any class, and there are classes at SBA that are specifically on organizational change, organizational management, so I would definitely recommend you check it out because it's a great benefit once you've already invested quite a lot at AU.
Did you introduce yourself, by the way, Marley, so everybody knows who you are?
Marley Kretcher, I'm the graduate advisor for the GEP and NRSD programs.
Hi, my name is Greg Alvarez, and I graduated from GEP last year. On the topic of skills and what does that mean and how do we develop them, I think, I don't know what the program was like in 2007, but the way it's developed now, I think there is a really nice balance. There are things like the Skills Institutes on the weekends. There are the stats classes, the GIS classes, some of the science classes. And the opportunity to go back retroactively and maybe take a class in HTML, coding, things like that is great. But when I look at what you need to succeed in the workplace, to me, it's the ability to communicate clearly. It's the ability to think critically, to take the 10,000-foot ideas and funnel them down into something that's actionable and that you can make a difference on, that you can boil down to kind of its core elements. And the theoretical stuff that we're talking about, the broad-based discussions, I think those are the most effective ways to obtain those skills because you can take these courses on strategic planning, you can take courses on all these sorts of things, communications, but really at the end of the day it all boils down to critical thinking, the ability to see the big picture and to be able to translate that big picture into steps. And I just think that the more theoretical kind of what does it all mean classes, there's no substitute for that. And I know one of the great things about this program, and I think it'll become even stronger now that we are maybe reaching out to alumni in a different way, but the closeness of each cohort I think is a really big strength. And I know, John, other people now, like when we get together, those are the conversations that we have, still those big picture conversations. And I feel like it's a motivating force because, when I started this program, obviously we all start this program because we think that there are problems in the world that we can help address, right? But for a lot of us, I think we don't really realize how complex and how big these problems are until we get here, and it kind of smacks you in the face in a way. And that is a constant motivator. That's something that really makes you want to go out and work your hardest and do your best. So those are my 2 cents.
I think we've got time for maybe one more, if anybody's got anything. Lauren, if we could pass the mic up.
This is just a quick question. I'm Lauren Kovac. I'm a first-year GEP student. I'm just curious to know how you guys actually got into the positions that you're in right now. Was it through like a friend or a network connection? Did you blindly apply? Did you intern there before? Like, what was the process, and what advice can you give us for the job hunt in a year or so?
My current job was just through one of my buddies who I met in D.C. during grad school at a party talking about what does it all mean, exactly like Greg was talking about. And we stayed in touch, nothing specific. And then when I was looking to move on from the EPA, I just hit him up and we talked. And he kept me in mind months later, and when a position opened up at Clean Water Action, he referred me to my now boss.
I started out as an ORISE in the Office of Air and Radiation, and I actually got that because a former student in the environmental, Kiho Kim, who some of you might know, kept pushing me to try and get a job at EPA while I was in school as an ORISE. I was like, I don't have time for this, and doing other stuff. ORISE is the Oak Ridge something Education
Institute of Science.
There you go. And so they have a lot of fellowships. I post them sometimes when I see them, but if you go Google ORISE internship, it'll pop up. And so they have EPA internships, they have DOE internships. Anyways, I did that for 6 months, and in that time a position opened up on USA Jobs, and I had Schedule A, which is one of the special hiring authorities from being a Boren, but I ended up just going straight to the USA Jobs, and I'm happy to help anyone do that. You can find me in the alumni directory if folks know me. I would encourage you to exaggerate your experience in a truthful way. Like, so if you've given a presentation to your professor where he's like a high-level congressman, it's the same. Just mark yes. And so that, the veterans do it, you guys can do it too. It's okay. So that's what I mean. Like, be truthful. If there's something you've just never done, if you've never done nuclear physics, well, you can't say you've done that. But if for some of the other stuff, just exaggerate in a truthful way. And then I got in. But what was a nice thing is that the guy who hired me knew the person I had worked for as an intern, and so once I made the cert to get an interview, I think having that connection really helped.
So I'm currently a foreign affairs officer, civil servant at state, but that was not always the case. I was also a summer intern, a fall intern, a student temporary. There are actually two of them. So Michael Bard and Christine Smith are both have been working in the same office. Yeah, there's like a temporary student. Now it's called Pathways. That allows you to work part-time while you're in school, and so I did that for about a year, and actually I deferred my graduation here, not just to get more time to do my practicum, but I deferred to actually keep that position simply because there are not a lot of federal jobs, and there weren't there were even fewer a few years ago open, and so but I knew that this was the office in which I wanted to work, and luckily for me something opened up, but yeah, tenacity, I guess.
For me, I can't emphasize enough just networking wherever you can. I know you've probably all heard that so much, but especially in this town. My journey to the World Bank actually started through the program where I interned at the Wilson Center. And speaking on our last the last discussion we were having, that was my first experience of applying the theoretical to the practical. And then through that, I was able to meet a few people through the director of that program, and I was cold after graduating. I applied to positions just cold online. Over a matter of 4 or 5 months, I had 2 interviews. Then I wasn't networking at all. It completely shifted, and then within 1 week of that, I had 4 interviews. So I can't speak enough to that. And through that, somebody got a hold of my resume, passed it around. I then had 5 interviews for a 15-day contract, and then that just turned into long-term position. So I can't emphasize enough that just building those networks. And it's just a matter of staying in touch with your classmates here, staying in touch with people that you meet along the way. Just drop an email every few months, once a year. Just keep in touch, and I can't emphasize that enough.
And just to piggyback on that, not only is it important for your first job and entry level and sort of getting into the different organizations, but the specific issues in which you want to work. The issues are huge, they're global, they're intractable, they're cross-cutting, et cetera, et cetera. But the networks of people that are actually working day to day on those issues, they could fit. The water world could fit. The sort of the key actors could fit in this room. It's tragically a lot of guys, but that means that the networks in which you have access to really is sort of even more important, because you're actually hitting a number of a big percentage of the networks that are actually doing the work. So.
And I would add that once you're working, it does not stop. Like, you still need to be making contacts and thinking about, sometimes you hit a wall. Like, maybe you can't get promoted, maybe you get a bad boss, maybe you don't agree with the director. Maintaining those contacts even when you like your job is also important, because you never know when you're going to want to shift, and maybe in short order.
It's also pretty hard and discouraging looking for a job. I was a bike messenger in DC for 3 months during the winter. So that was also
now.
Yeah. But that's all part of the game, and it has to be hard before it's good.
I just want to say that Saj's phone actually vibrated 3 times while he was explaining networking in 3 sentences, so he knows what he's talking about. So what did we learn? We learned that you should be the worm in the apple. We learned that you can get Stan. We learned, God forbid, don't be Stan. And we learned that the way to not be Stan and to be the worm is to do everything strategically, starting with how you use adverbs. So I hope people will stay for the next session after a short break, no break. We're going straight to the next section, which is going to be breakout groups where we can get people communicating, students and alumni, more face-to-face and so on. So thank you to our panelists for really time and your wisdom.
When you can start. When you can.
I can't tell you that now, but
No, you're not now, but like at some point.
Okay, so let me do a little organizing of people, and I need to acknowledge a couple people, and then we can kind of go to the bathroom and stuff as we get into our small groups. I thought it would be a good time for us to become more informal, but before I do that, I want to acknowledge our new young faculty that so many of you didn't get a chance to study with. We have Sakina Jinnah over there, who works on global climate change, and we have Garrett Grady, who works on food and ag. And you guys are really unlucky that you didn't have their classes, because they're really fabulous. And the next point of business is Stephanie here? Yes. So Stephanie Block is the head of our alumni relations office, and she's paying for the incredible reception that we're going to have at 5:30. And so therefore, and not only because, I want to invite Stephanie to come up and say a couple things. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really, we're supporting this because of the leadership that Professor Conca kind of laid, an awesome foundation before Professor Nicholson got here. But I'll tell you, Carly is a firecracker, and if Simon's not careful, I'm going to hire her, because she put this entire thing together in a really short amount of time and so professional. So can we just give Carly a round of applause? She applied for a grant through the AU Alumni Association, and she was awarded the largest amount. They were really blown away with this particular type of format and setup, so congratulations to all of you. I mean, this is really fantastic. Really, really, really quick, for student, how many students are in the audience? Okay, great. And Lark is here. Hi, Lark. Hi. she's an alumna, obviously, but Lark and I go back. If you're a student and you want to learn how to connect with alumni, you can make an appointment to see me. A lot of students don't know that they actually have access to the online directory for alumni. So you can go on LinkedIn and find some people that you want to connect with, and then for free you can go to the online community. So I encourage you to email me if you want to take advantage of office hours. There's a flyer outside that talks about all the different ways that alumni can give back in terms of their time. So all the different ways you can volunteer. We have an Industry Days event coming up at the end of the month at the Department of Energy. All students and alumni are invited. We also have Resume Review Week at the end of the month, and those appointments have been taken, but it's really neat. Grad students have signed up to get their resumes reviewed, and all their resumes are going to be sent to alumni to try to encourage Eagles hiring Eagles, Eagles helping Eagles. So does anybody have any questions? My office is on the first floor of the atrium across from the women's restroom. I love SIS. I love everything that it stands for. The alumni make my job really awesome and really fun. Thanks to you guys for taking time out of your day to inspire and network.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so we don't have that much time between now and the reception, but I thought it might be nice for us to get into small groups, and I'm torn because I will be accused of recreating the silos with what I've come up with. I thought for a while, well, we could do multilateral, then like U.S. government and private and civil society, but I'm going to go ahead and do issue areas. But I want a show of hands. So listen up to this list, and then I'm going to get a show of hands for how many would be interested in breaking into small groups for each to make sure we have a critical mass for each. So I have energy, climate, food and ag, water, international development, and conservation, wildlife, and parks. Okay, so how many might want to break for energy and climate? Raise your hand.
That's a group.
How many for food and ag?
That's a group.
How many for water?
That's a group.
How many for international development?
That's a group.
And how many for conservation, wildlife, wildlands?
That's a group.
Okay. But do we have alumni? Do we have alumni for each group?
I think it worked.
Okay, so that should work. All right, so why don't we everybody get your own chair, and we'll move energy, climate over here. We'll move food and ag over there. We'll put water over there. We'll put conservation. You can be in the middle because there's the fewest of you, and we'll put international development over here by the podium. Okay. And the idea is you'll go around the circle, introduce yourselves, and then just have a free chat, as they say in Chinese. Yeah.
Good. I think everyone's still a little bit in Mercury retrograde because it's been really low energy all week, but we're coming out of that now. So
You're off to...
send me a picture of the baby.
Yes.
I'd love to see that. Get to sleep first. Yeah, I gotta go teach myself. I probably won't. We should catch up. Yes. Just the fact that I knew that you were expecting. Things are a little quieter for me now. I got my book out. It's not out yet. It's out this summer. There's something in October. And that big USIP grant that I have with mostly as well. Gearing up to project on water and climate uncertainty and analytic work, but I just use a lot of spending doesn't hold up to fairly conventional pragmatic kind of analysis. Using costs out the price of uncertainty and the value of flexibility. So like 1,000 megawatts here versus 1 megawatt in 1,000 places, and lose the economies of scale, but you need flexibility. So the idea that the more we lose uncertainty, the more that's a trade you're looking to actually make. So a couple of PNDS faculty and I were writing a grant now actually one of the two things. One is going to be city, something that's just the water supply in the city center. And the other is going to be an exam project that will over 30 years, alternatives to water in the basin. Given the value, can we put a positive price tag on that flexibility? It's really interesting stuff. So it's tough. There's a group called Sure. Yeah.
No, it's John Matthews. I will shoot you his email. He did look at exactly those issues.
Oh, really?
They struggled with phenomenal degree. My personal view is I don't think there's anyone who actually knows how to solve it. Even though they all are,
So I've got a couple of people that do quantitative jobs in this project. So I think what we're going to try to do is just, so the idea would be kind of made the
I think you guys are the critical mass for water.
Oh yeah, don't want to tie them too much. Anyway, we'll talk. So, you know, we can advance.
Instructions for how to system small in our hands. So what else?
I would say for the current students, if you have like questions from the alumni,
so being the only foreign policy. How do we reconcile American foreign policy with, our energy policy? How do we get it to a more sustainable place? What moves do we need to make in our foreign policy to make it so that we can have a what? I know, right?
I think there's a lot of different issues. So if you're in the government, you work for the president, who's the boss, basically, and if he's sustainable, but Congress is not, that's a really big business implication. I would say Tea Party era and things that happen.
Big class, don't raise your hand.
Right. Okay, no, I went to a skills institute. So this is a plug. This is it was done by the founders of this group called League of Entrepreneurs. I don't know if you've heard of it, but you can look it up online and it's free. And basically, it's for innovators within an organization who they're trying to make some change, and it's kind of just giving them resources and they can talk and see how to do these things. And one interesting thing, Rosario was saying was like a lot of them work for the government. They don't want other people to know they're in this group because people may think, oh, they have some agenda, but it's really like you do have these ideas, these things you want to do that other people may not agree with. So it's really you're using this tool and this forum to kind of develop strategies to get done what you need to. So working with others, maybe people who you should talk to and things like that. So I just wanted to put that out there because that's something I've definitely seen as that.
Certainly the inevitable process arguably would be to what that looks like. That will be the United Nations financial negotiation process, which is the climax this December with hopefully a post-Kyoto protocol agreement of sorts that will sort of define the contours of international climate cooperation. About that probably a bigger class last semester that dove into that.
I'm sorry, if you had a well, I just had a question more specific for the people who are here. Going into the energy industry, just coming out of grad school, what skills do you think are most valuable? So I come from a policy background. I studied political science, anthropology. I'm not big on science. I've taken basic energy science. Do you think what's the most valuable skill that's needed in the industry right now to actually get us jobs?
Someone from the audience was speaking earlier, and he said the things that matter most are the ability to communicate effectively, think strategically, I realized about, that was you. So what was the third one? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, connect the top to the down. So, I mean, that made a lot of sense to me, and that's true no matter where you go. And so, acknowledging that you want to give yourself as much flexibility as possible. So I think about halfway through my experience at AU, I realized what I was doing was, embracing that idea of a grab bag of skills that I was developing. And I realized, so I come from I'm a physics teacher, and I came to grad school, and I quickly realized I didn't want to write. So I took as many classes as I could to develop my communication skills, because they were lacking. Writing lab reports, really set you up for writing, right? But that was, for me, that was where I was deficient. But it wasn't in the science aspect that you said you have less of an interest in. So figure out what tools you need.